Or at least in my view, that's the case. And yet, quite a large number of farmers in Scotland and certainly throughout the UK voted to leave. Whether that was because they were just fed up with the bureaucracy or the form filling or something, I don't know. But anyway, so we're going to see who was right. Was it a good thing to leave or not to leave? And Alan, I'd like to hear your assessment of the situation. So if you'd like to give us a bit of your reconnoiter of the scene.
Thank you, John. Yes, I was present when the announcement of Brexit, we're leaving, was announced, and it was quite a day. I still remember it because as a membership organisation, we have about 8,000 or 9,000 members farming in Scotland. The view of the board was that we should remain, and there was a number of reasons, and we deliberated, and then the shock of that morning that the public had decided, the voters had decided to leave. So, you know, what do you then do? And that was the question asked to the union. What is agriculture going to do? We knew what the terms for fishing was. We knew other sectors, what about farming. And we do a lot of business with Europe, and that's the crucial. And we also have a lot of support, as you're well aware. The Common Agricultural Policy was one of the founding reasons, the policy of the common market. And it's all about trade. And that's originally what Europe was about. It was about trade. And John, you'll be well aware as to what that covered. Mm-hmm. In the interim, farming, excuse me, to an extent has done quite well about having that support. People call it subsidy, but it's actually delivering food, hopefully affordable food, to the people in Europe. And we have 500 million people to feed in Europe. And there was a concern that there had to be a policy, and why wouldn't you want a policy? And hear how it's done. And it was to get that commonality there so that there's a level playing field over the whole of Europe. And there's been other countries added. So from a Scottish farming perspective, it's helped. It gave investment, it gave a bit of clarity, gave a bit of encouragement to invest for the future. With Brexit, could that all change? You know, what will happen? We get about 500 or 600 million euros coming to Scotland via the UK from Europe to deliver support mechanisms. And it goes to all sectors. And that will change. And because it's a UK decision here where the money comes, and agriculture in Scotland is devolved, we have a tricky position with policy. Who does what? Who's accountable to what? Who does the call? Who makes the call? And interesting to see your poster behind you on food standards. That seems to be one that's coming out, that's resonating with people. And it's all about the potential American trade deal, USA trade deal, which could see hormone beef coming, chlorinated chicken coming, all these other phytosanitary and sanitary things that we can't do here in Europe. We cannot use these products. Interestingly, with hormones, you get about 15% better efficiency by using them. And as a youngster, I still remember using hormones in beef cattle, and there was a benefit. In America, they use hormones in milk production. They have the use of GM, genetic modified, and in Europe, we don't have that. So the point going forward from a Scottish farming perspective is, what's the policy going to be? Who makes that call? And ultimately, who benefits? And a lot of the trade deals I'm hearing about potentially with America, I'm not seeing the consumer being at the top. I'm not seeing, as a farmer, food production and food security and efficiency at the top. I have a big fear that we will just be forgotten about. And it's right that as consumers, need to understand the pros and the cons. I also believe that Europe, and I'm pro-European, that the European market should still be achievable for Scottish produce. And why shouldn't it be? What will be the standards? What will be the terms? So a free trade arrangement is really what we're looking for here, so that we can carry on trading with Europe. So I speak to French farmers, German farmers, Polish farmers. We're all in the same boat here. And going forward, why wouldn't you want to try and maintain the status quo? Unfortunately, at UK level, the politics are making it very difficult. There seems to be one thing said, and then suddenly there's a U-turn and other things being said. So from your organisation point of view, how do you remain positive in the fact that you will be leaving Europe? How do you get the message over that actually there is still a strong case to remain with that European idea, that policy, that fit? And why wouldn't you? And if you're going to change, you should be asking, well, what are we going to? What are we moving to? How is this going to benefit society? So we have a climate change agenda. We don't actually have a food policy agenda in UK. And with all the upheaval of COVID-19, I think the priority should be a food policy strategy. We should have a food security minister, just as the same way I have an energy minister. And the reason being is that in the last 10, 12 weeks, from a farming perspective, I've seen the supply chain not quite broken, but being very close to not delivering your food on the shelves. And every government knows that by not providing food, you're within 4 or 5 days of anarchy. And we avoided that. Make no mistake, whether it's the retailers or the processors or farmers in general and the hauliers, everyone basically came around to delivering you food. And you didn't. You had some queuing to do, but you didn't suffer. And going forward, I'd like to think there is a policy, a food policy, that makes sure that doesn't happen. Just as the Common Agricultural Policy made sure that 500 million people didn't have to think about where there's their food going to come from. And that's crucial to try and get that message over. So going forward, you see the context from an agriculture point of view is that we've had that security of the Common Agricultural Policy. What's going to replace it? Is the same amount of funding going to go in, or are the parameters going to change? And already we're hearing from a UK point of view is that there will be no direct support. Now, interestingly, from a Scottish perspective, farming perspective, 60% of farms would have made a loss without farm support. Full stop. We're being asked to do public good. We're being asked to look after the environment. And from a farming perspective, why wouldn't you want to look after soils? Why wouldn't you want to look after the welfare of animals? Why wouldn't you want to try and be part of the answer to the climate change? Unfortunately, the policymakers and some of the politicians believe that the quick fix will just be bring food in, regardless. And you and consumers, and 80% don't question where it comes from, where food comes from. And my point, trying to, in this short summary to yourselves, would be food should matter. The security of food should matter. What farmers do to the soil should matter. And by you eating food, you should be questioning, in the policymaker's viewpoint, if the food comes in, it should be to the same standards that we've currently got. It should be the same welfare standards. And if it's not, who's benefiting? And why is it not? And that's a crucial question that I think you should be putting. As far as the trade goes forward, excuse me, I do hope that we will still be dealing with Europe. We have to be looking at that as a market. It's on our doorstep. And the standards and the policy and the agreements currently are the same fit. So why wouldn't you? My feeling is that there is a UK perspective here going on that somehow we need all the other benefits for society, and we'll do a quick deal with USA, America, and you will get what you ask for. You will get food and welfare standards below what you're currently being given. And it may well be that that's what you want. It may well be that that's a fine, that's great. That we'll sign that off because we're having the benefit of the other trade deals. I just hope that you stop and think about future consequences and we don't go down that road. And it's good to see your poster there questioning. And there's been a petition to the UK government of over 1 million people questioning that, and quite rightly. We do now have a body set up, although it's advisory, for the government to question standards, to actually make sure that's part and parcel. They had a chance in the Ag Bill in Westminster to make that part of legislation. They didn't. And again, you should be questioning why. And I don't think the answers coming back from UK government have been very clever here. From a Scottish perspective, And again, we don't have the same kind of quality of land that they have in England. So we have 70% of less favoured area, the hills, the moorlands. We have a lot of livestock, and quite rightly, you and I, we don't eat grass. So we need some form of protein. And by the way, beef, lamb of natural grass in Scotland, I would argue is by far the safest, the healthiest that you could ask for. So why import beef from America or beef from Brazil? Why have a future trade agreement that allows that product to come in on the same shelf and expect labelling to then differentiate against our standards? So there's a lot there, I've said in a short period. You can understand from a farming perspective my concern, but I also have a concern for the environment and the soils that we have in Scotland and our jobs. Interestingly, just with whiskey, and I grow barley for the malting industry, we see what a US government can do on tariffs. Now it's only 10%, but suddenly that has an impact on barley production and carryover. So suddenly by the imposition of tariffs, and we have avoided that in Europe by having tariff frees or quotas, etc. But by just being in that free world, that free global marketing, you can see how we can be blown out of the water very quickly by a country deciding we don't like what you're doing in one sector, we'll impose a tariff on the other. And they're doing it. Now the tariffs can be 100%. Unbelievable, they can just shut off your business overnight. And that's down to the whim of the government elsewhere. So that's what we're up against. I'm still optimistic that Scottish farming will be here. I'd like to think that we will be better than just park keepers, that we will provide jobs, we will add to the economy, we will have the innovation and the investment that we require, and we'll have the research. So I still think we'll have a future. I think the changes will be quite drastic in certain sectors, and we will need public support, strong public support, which I would add, we've had that over the last 2 or 3 months. I've been greatly relieved as to going about my job, how people reflect what we're doing. I've also seen more people out cycling and walking in the countryside and stopping for a moment to see what's going on. And that's been really good to get the message over. So going forward, I believe there is a positive message. I still believe in a pro-European trade agreement that will reflect and have compromises that allow us to carry on. And I'm up for the potential of trade elsewhere based on our provenance, based on our standards, based on our high health, natural grass-reared systems. I believe we will be part of the answer to climate change. And I believe that the Scottish Government get that. I really need strong conviction from UK Westminster that there is a place for UK farming, full stop. And that does concern me. So I'm open to questions. I've rather rambled a wee bit pretty quickly here. If you would wish more detail, I'm quite happy to give you it. But from a farmer perspective in Scotland, I'm up for the challenge. I'm up for the change. But I can't do this alone. I need to have public support and a recognition that Scottish farming matters. And why wouldn't it? So, again, I've had to
Alan, why did so many Scottish farmers vote to leave Europe then?
I don't believe in that, John. You know, from a board perspective, when we announced that we were still for remaining in Europe, I did not have my phone ringing constantly.
Right.
We pointed out the benefits and we pointed out the pros and the cons. And again, the union had to take a view that why are we doing this? And it wasn't just self-interest in maintaining the subsidy. It was with 500 million people on your doorstep.
Yeah, you've got a market.
I want to be part of that, John.
Okay. Questions from the rest? Anybody else would like to bring? Yes, Paul, Northway. Right.
Farmers I've talked to locally are generally small to medium, and they're intensely worried about what is going to happen. They seem to think that the large-scale farmers will probably be okay, but they're the ones that I think are the ones that are worrying the most. And they tend to be the ones, obviously, I think the majority of farmers in Scotland. So what's your take on that?
I would agree with you, but I think regardless of scale, if there's a wrong trade agreement here, we're all in the same water. Europe have been consciously trying to help small town farmers. But interestingly, our small farmer in Scotland is considerably bigger than a European small farmer. So in your mind, there's a perception, and the family farm used to be 300 acres. And you could support a family and generally 2 workers with that in the past. Nowadays, you would struggle to support one family of 300 acres. So there's been diversification. And a lot of small family farms have diversified, whether it's tourism, whether it's renewables. We've been resilient. But there comes a point where you see that other income coming in and you question why you're farming, because you're subsidizing that as well. And that's what the next generation are questioning. Why carry on with the loss-making part when I can get the job satisfaction or the quality of living from the other job? So I would accept you're quite right, but don't just think that it's actually just a small one here, because I think in some of these trade agreements we'll just get blown out of the water regardless of scale, and we don't have the scale that they do have down in England. Whether you're a cereal farmer in Lincolnshire or Norfolk, they're now trying to get up to 10,000 acres per unit of arable land. We'll have people up in the north with 10,000 acres of poor land that will struggle to survive, keep 10% of the production that they'll do down there. So the scale's important, but it's the concept of where do you want your food? Do you want it local? What do you want? And as a family farm, I think they will make it work, to be honest, because they have to. And they're currently doing it. But they are worried, yes, I would agree.
I think I'm going to Bill next, but one thing, we think about a trade agreement, trade agreement in America, okay, it should be all level playing field. But you've got to remember that the American agriculture is heavily subsidized, hugely subsidized, quite apart from whether or not they're hormone beef or whatever else as well. So you're up against farmers who are being heavily subsidized at their end. So if we're not subsidized, then you're not on a level playing field. Whereas in Europe, in the CAP, for the whole of Europe, 500 million people, we're all on the same basis, essentially. Bill, you had a question?
Yes, thanks, John.
Yep.
Alan, that's a very excellent recap. Thanks. It makes me wonder if I could maybe express John's question the other way around. Why is it the very common perception that farmers were for Brexit? What happened there? I mean, I'm assuming when you say that you came out for Remain, that you're talking about the National Farmers Union across the UK, or was that just the Scottish end?
It was the Scottish end, Bill. So we have our own organisation. So, and we'll have 1/10 of the membership that they have in England. So, and the devolved have their own organisation. But as unions, we would meet together. So the feeling was that I understand the concern with Europe, and I think, to be honest, the northern countries, and John would maybe back me up, I did go to Europe quite often, to Brussels, and we would have allegiances with the Dutch, the Germans, and the Scandinavian countries to try and change the way this model was working, because they were trying to do one size fits all.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work. So the farmers in the UK and the farmers in Scotland going, actually, they're not listening to what I want. Therefore, what do we do? Well, interestingly, I think we were getting 70% of what we were wanting. But I think some of them wanted GM, some of them wanted this. The big businesses wanted the free to farm. They didn't want regulations. They could see, pesticides being taken away. They just felt, look, I've had enough of this. They're not listening. I've got a vote here. And what could happen? What's the worst that could happen? Well, we didn't know. And a lot of the detail that was being done at the time didn't actually quantify the implications to agriculture. There was a lot of benefits elsewhere, perhaps, of leaving Europe. But from an agricultural context, I think there was a bit of muffle. There was a bit of background noise. It just wasn't, the message wasn't clear. And people thought, well, actually, it won't really matter. We'll just go with it.
Okay, so just, if I could, sorry, just press you on that. I'm just trying to nail it down in my head as much as anything. So Scottish Farmers Union came out for Remain. The Farmers Union down south did not, or did they sit in the fence, or?
I think they had some larger scale farmers and a different farming. I mean, they have 70% of their land grade 2-3. I mean, good land. We have the complete reversal in Scotland.
Yeah.
Their support system, and they had higher yields. They maybe had more people on the doorstep for the market. You know, the scale was bigger. They maybe felt that actually I could be better off out of Europe. And in fact, they'll still trade with us. So what's the issue? And I might be able to free this freedom to farm. That sort of message was louder down south. I can't remember as to what the English Union was trying to say. I think they were on the fence. I think they could see the pros and the cons of both ways. From the Scottish perspective, and that's what's important from my view here, was that we have 70% of land LFA. There's restrictions as to what they do, predominantly livestock, predominantly sheep. A third of our trade for lamb goes to Europe. A third.
Yeah.
A third of our lamb comes in from New Zealand, believe it or not, and the rest is UK. So the feeling from a Scottish farming perspective, certainly livestock, was that how are we going to compete against the Irish in beef or in lamb? What do you do? And I think there was an element of, let's stick with what we've got. This is a Scottish argument. Let's stick with what we've got, but let's try and improve it. And that should have been the stronger message, rather than the status quo and we're going to carry on. That wasn't clear at the time. And I think from a pro-European context, they should have been more proactive in explaining the changes in CAP, because people still had in mind, we have wine lakes, we have, olive lakes, olive oil lakes. This is not good. And by the way, we're paying in more than we get out. And there was a feeling, well, actually, why should we be doing that? Let's just stand alone. And that's a difficult concept. I think you should try and help others. I think you should have a policy that doesn't discriminate. My fear going forward is that we will have an ag policy that does discriminate against the small-time farmer or the livestock farmer. And that's quite clear in my mind.
Thanks, Alan. John, can I follow up?
Yeah.
This is a completely different question, because the other big player in this whole area, or big players, must be the food processors and the supermarkets. I suppose there's a view, there's a hope almost that one of the kind of white knights that's going to ride to the rescue to stop no deal becoming a reality is pressure from business. Where do you see them sitting in this whole situation? The impression I have is that food processors and supermarkets are hugely influential, arguably more so, maybe not in terms of the public perception, but arguably more so with government than farmers. I might be wrong. I'm braced to be corrected. But how do you see that coming in?
Yeah, my view is that you are correct. Farmers, we lobby well. Make no mistake. We get out there. We try and have people with us. We argue our cause, and we've been very successful there. But 80% of our farming business goes through retail. The Tesco's and these big, and they have to deliver profits to shareholders. And Tesco is one model that consistently gave growth over a number of decades of 5% plus. And there's been in the press the last couple of years as to reasons how they did that. They put very strong pressure onto suppliers to make sure they had their 5 or 10% profit, regardless of the consequences. The fundamentals have slightly changed, Bill, is that Aldi and Lidl have come in, German retailers, and they actually have a better or a stronger relationship with the farmers and pay better, pay quicker. I'm not singling out Tesco per se, but you've got to question the retailer model that will deliver cheap food regardless. And on the same shelf space, have a Scottish brand that can have commingling, can have differentiation that's not clear. And in the consumer's point of view, and I've seen it myself, I've seen New Zealand lamb labelled as Scotch lamb on a supermarket shelf. And what do you do? Now, that's a generalisation, but I think I don't want to fight the retailers. I think they have a strong place to play here. But the government will want, or maybe, and this is my view, going forward from Brexit, they will want a cheap food policy.
Yeah.
Full stop.
That's my fear, and in a sense that means that the retailers are more likely to be well disposed to an American deal.
I think when you consider the Asda as part of Walmart, when you consider the nature of these businesses, I mean, they're billion turnovers, they're big. The consumer may well question, actually, I want Scotch beef on the shelf, and I want it to be clear. Interestingly, America, USA doesn't recognize PGI status, this protected geographical indicator. And their argument in America is that, well, there is a Parma, there is a town called Parma, so I want to have Parma ham. There'll be a town called Angus, and I want to have Aberdeen Angus beef. The argument is that we can do this because why can't you? Well, you can't. In this.
Can I just say that was...
Margaret, yes, please come in. You want
Sorry,
to?
no, so I was just, I went to, you just made the point I was going to make, that you are not being served well by this threat that origin, area, country of origin is not going to be put on packaging. Seems to be one of the demands that are being made, and that is terrifying. I mean, certainly would be terrible for you, and you're also in a bind with the supermarkets, because I went to a talk on you don't need me to tell you this, but I went to a talk in the Parliament a few years ago about food security in Scotland, and some of the farmers there, speaking off the record, had some horrific stories to tell about the contracts they were bound into by the supermarkets, and how that, if the supermarkets are going to have even more power with buying, I don't know, Tanzanian beef or something, it's the consumer is not going to be the beneficiary at the end of this. And I would just like to feel that there was something that the consumer, you said 80% of consumers don't ask where the food comes from, but if there was some kind of movement that, and maybe that the consumers could actually make their views known, that they do want Scottish beef that's produced to high standards. I mean, I can say it to you, but I need to say it to Boris Johnson, for example. Is there anything I can do?
Well, there needs to be safeguards in place that give you that reassurance that what is said on the label is actually it. And also when you go to restaurants, there's a lot of food going through the public, the procurement, to restaurants, to ready meals, to schools, to hospitals. And we've been questioning all along that you must be upfront and genuine about what's in that food. And why wouldn't you be? And I'm not saying that going forward that wouldn't happen. It would, but it's not a given. And that is really clear in my mind as to why you would need to have legislation that protects the consumer. You know, as a farmer, of course I would be asking for that. But I'm not asking for protectionism here. I'm just asking for you to be clear that what you eat is safe. Mm-hmm. Not just to you personally, but to the environment. And does tick the box on the climate change as well. So you know, that, and why wouldn't you going forward want that? Mm-hmm. We're not getting that clear signal that will be paramount in any discussion. And there's reasons for that, because hey, elsewhere in the world, that doesn't happen. But the food could still be okay to eat. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be in a lot of people's view, well, actually, I'm not going to die for it, Therefore, why can't I buy it that? That seems to be the principle. And the argument going forward is that, well, actually, society believes that food shouldn't just deliver you healthy benefits. It should actually deliver you more to the environment, more in jobs, more in looking after the soil as well. Mm-hmm. And we've been farming in Scotland for a considerably long time. You know, there's settlements up in Orkney and up north that, you know, there's been farming for 4,000 years plus. And we seem to do it right in Scotland. And I've seen elsewhere soil degradation and loss of habitats for farming ground. And that does concern me. But going back to the retailers' question, I think they have a strong place, a role to play here in actually being proactive in standing by those current standards. And if they're not, you should be questioning why. Is it the shareholders that benefit, or is it you as consumers benefit?
Can I ask about this? What could be different in Scotland from the UK? I mean, we've got Gove's concept for the UK of what return for farmers for doing environmental things and so on. That's what you're going to get your money from, beavers and whatever, but not for food production. Could Scotland be different at all and get away with it?
I think we have to be different, John, just by the nature of farming and the smaller farms. Interestingly, though, from your perspective as a consumer or as a taxpayer, if the Scottish environment naturally gives that, are you willing to pay for that? So they have different pressures down south. So we don't have continuous wheat fields that they do have in Oxford, or you know, we don't have that range of arable land where there's intensification to the scale that they have down south. The point I'm getting up here is that we have a huge amount of wilderness, but we still have people. And the people might not just be sheep farming or livestock farming, there will be other jobs there. So the nature of the land and the way it's farmed in Scotland is different, John. And by that argument, you have to have a different policy. Mm-hmm. And it's crucial that UK government recognise that. And it is devolved, John. You know, we've had the framework coming from Europe for the last, since the 73, 75, you know. And there's that overarching umbrella that said from a taxpayer's point of view or a policy point of view, this is what we'd like you to have. This is what you want to sign up. But you can do slightly something different in the devolved in Scotland. And that's what I would like to see. Because my concern going forward is that a lot of the land in Scotland is all perhaps delivering the environmental. Therefore, why should you currently give it support?
Joe Goodburn, you had a hand up?
Yes, and I think Larissa has her hand up as well.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm not very good at noticing these things. Shout out if you need, because you're all...
Just to follow up what Alan just said, I think the Secretary, about the less favoured areas, I think the Scottish Secretary of State for Agriculture said that for every pound that goes into supporting farming, you probably get 4 or 5 more pounds coming into those rural communities. And all of this wilderness area is what makes Scotland attractive for tourism, and it's what's helping to reinvigorate our environment, bringing back Caledonian Forest, all of those sorts of things. So I think we probably all accept that's a good thing, and that we do need a separate Scottish agriculture policy. What I find very scary at the moment with the way British democracy is going, that, as you've said a few times, Alan, it's a devolved power. It was devolved by the UK government, and they can take it back tomorrow if they feel like it. And I'm just scared that little by little, bits of it will be taken back. And that's why I'm really interested to hear what you think we could still do about food standards. Now, I should have been following this more closely, but I know the UK bill has been in the House of Lords, but I'm not sure if it's got back to the House of Commons yet, because I don't know how it fitted in with recess. But the original amendment to try to change the part on food standards was rejected. The amendment by the Food Standards Committee chair. Is there still a second reading of that amendment? Is there still a point in really pushing the NFU's petition And we're in the process as local groups of the Scottish European movement of writing letters that we're going to ask all our members to send to their MPs. And so it would be really helpful to have some solid facts and figures that we can put in about food standards. And something that I heard from Claire Taylor, who's one of the journalists in the Scottish Farmer, on some of the awful things that happen in America. You know, cattle being brought together, 9,000 head of cattle being fatted together with no traceability whatsoever. Like Margaret was saying, you've got no idea which farms they've come from, and all being pumped full of antibiotics to reduce fat quantity because that's what the consumer wants. So what do you think we should do most effectively in terms of targeting MPs with information that they need to raise when the bill comes for the end of its second reading, which I think is still to happen?
I think, I mean, my concern is that why on earth would they not want what you're suggesting in the bill? I mean, why?
Because they've got a big majority, and I don't know why they don't want it, because they want
the freedom to do what the hell they like.
Exactly, John. And once that's pointed out, and then by accepting that argument, your next question would be, well, what's coming down the road? What is coming down the road? Tell us truthfully what you think will be in trade deals that will give us the reassurance, first of all, to carry on farming here in UK, but secondly, as a consumer, why would you want not to safeguard these things? Tell me that in clear English. Why would you ever want to be in a position where you're not accountable to the people that elect you because of some trade deal done for some other reason? And I cannot get my head around that fundamental principle. And I then question the trust and the judgment. And then it comes back to effectively the ideology that to an extent undermined some of the European things that were going on. So the European, and I'm pro-European, but some of the ideology that is being done, that this one size fits all and you will then fit into it, I don't think going forward that's the right thing to do. And I think that was recognised, as I say, in Europe. And I think that's where you then become the positive, the proactive, and then you get people to doubt what's being said. You get people to question, well, why didn't they? Or why would you? And therefore, what are you then going to then have to be expected to do in the future? So it's not just with food. It might be with drugs. It might be with insurance. It might be a health service. And I hear snippets of that coming in. And then by doing that, the counter is that, well, you're just being niggly, or you just, you have no vision. And I hear that so often in politics, that when you question, they then question back to you your vision. And as I say, especially with food, I would really have grave doubts as to why on earth they wouldn't want to impose that in any legislation. And work on that and question that continually. And there's a million petitioners have done that. Unfortunately, we've just got an advisory one with the DTI, advisory. The Parliament will hopefully make a strong view. The Lords will question, and they have questioned as to why these standards are in. You will have strong global pressure to then undermine what you're questioning. And it's happening already. So there's a lot of work to be done, make no mistake.
I don't put much store by an advisory body, frankly, I'm afraid.
I'm not much faith, to be honest, John. I think and they've given 6 months to come back with their reasoning or their arguments. By then, I think there'll be so much water under the bridge that I think decisions will have already been made, or may well already have been made, John. It's a concern, certainly in food, agriculture.
Larissa, your turn next. Sorry, Larissa Slaney. You had a question? Unmute yourself. Unmute. You have to unmute.
Sorry, I should know this by now, shouldn't I? Thanks, John. And Allan, thank you for being here and giving us this summary of a topic that is rather complex. And I think you've done a really good job of trying to help us to understand even just a little bit of it. I have a question regarding, I mean, John was asking earlier on why did the farmers vote this way or that way? And that's kind of now water under the bridge. For me, one of the questions is why did, once the farmers realized, those who voted for Brexit, or maybe even those who sat on the fence, once they realized what the implications will be, why was there not an uproar? I mean, maybe there was, but it wasn't obvious enough for the public. Why? Let me just finish this. Part of the reason why I'm asking is that just before the last March for Change that we held in London, there was a rumor that the farmers might join us, and that I personally think that would have made a huge difference if the farmers had been out there on their tractors, and that would have really caught the public's eye and the politicians' eye as well. They could not have ignored us quite so easily, despite the fact that we were over 1 million people. They still managed to ignore us to a great extent. So why didn't the farmers kind of join in? And at that point, what are the farmers or the farmers union going to do now going forward, try to avert the worst Brexit outcome we could possibly imagine? That is basically what we're heading for just now, the no deal. And thirdly, what can we do? How can we support the farmers? What can we do? I think it's kind of following on from Joe's question. Give us some, give us some tasks. Give us a to-do list. What we can do as a group. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. With the first one, I do remember in people's living rooms with a beer or a whiskey, not arguing, but discussing this with fellow farmers. And my argument, I put a strong argument, just as you're doing. What the hell are you doing? This doesn't seem to make sense. And they countered it by saying, well, you had more detail. You knew more. That's why you wanted to stay in. And that really worries me, that they're using the fact of lack of information to come to the conclusion that we would have been better out of Europe. And there were snippets that they would come up with to say, well, actually, there's freedom to farm. That seemed to be a resonance there, that we can get on and farm as we were doing prior to being in Europe, and we could call the shots. That seemed to be the strong argument. Interestingly, they forgot about the fact that, well, if you want to trade with Europe, what do you think the standards are going to be? What do you think the bars, where do you think it's going to be put? Or do you think the German farmer or the French farmer are going to allow you to do what the hell you want and undermine what they're currently trying to do? No. But that didn't seem to dwell on them too much. It was this, we've got a chance here, we'll stick 2 fingers up and we're walking. Right, so then there comes the cold light of day. Well, we will be walking. And again, the union, the NFU Scotland, we're really fearful that we would be under the free trade. We'd be out with it. We'd be in the big wide world, and we don't know what we would get. That didn't seem to worry them. And then it was pointed out the level of tariffs that can be on beef and lamb and other products, and that didn't seem to worry. So I don't know. There was an element
to worry who? Sorry.
The farmers, the ones I was speaking to.
The Scottish or English farmers, or in general?
The Scottish, and I think this is generalisation. So the Scottish farmers. So there was an element of we'll manage, because we always have done. And I think there was an element of complacency, maybe, of the potential consequences of being out there in that global market where, they don't even know where Scotland is. That's quite, and then they thought, well, we're going to be exporting. We're going to be taking this on. And I hear this argument that we're going to be the second biggest exporter in the world. Who's kidding who here? Yeah. So this is, and you get this level of discussion, and then you'll either find that they'll walk away from you, or they'll just shrug their shoulders and say, well, actually, I'll take what comes. So that's anyway, the ones I've met. And interestingly, the that wanted to come out of Europe were quite muted prior to the result. And the results sort of mitigated what they were saying, you know, and it's the same with other spheres here with independence, or it's the same with other things. The ones that were fearful of what they might want and then were delivered it were actually shouting louder and then saying they were a farmer, you know. So again, from a union's perspective, I think it's different in England. I think the English farmer were more ready for this free trade, more ready to take on the world at a bigger scale, as I mentioned earlier there. You asked, what can we do? You know, what could a consumer do? Interestingly, in the last 3 months, I think the consumer in UK has been fantastic. They've recognised local, they've recognised what we do in farming. They, I think, been proactive in buying, because a lot of the time, what's coming into the country was held up at the port. Or a lot of the people didn't decide to put the produce there because they were concerned that it would go off. And we're working again in agriculture with a lot of perishable commodities here. And I respect that, I understand that. But the fear, the implications of COVID and the supply chain, that's actually was what we thought Brexit would be, the implications. You know, and interestingly, in a very short period, we saw how important local food and what we do suddenly came up the agenda. And that's encouraging. So, you know, going forward, of course, support local. I've got to be very careful from a Scottish perspective, because a lot of our market, 80% of our market is England. And you know, we can't keep bashing our consumer here, our buyer, and we seem to be getting that in Scotland. And again, a lot of our lamb, as I mentioned earlier, goes to France and Spain. A lot of our whiskey, we sell more whiskey to Germany than I think we do to America. They value, you know, the real thing. So going forward, I need, as I say, more people to recognise what we do in Scotland, and we will brand better, we will try and sell and market better, and we've got Scotland Food and Drink doing that in Scotland. The issue,
Alan, if this was France doing a Frexit, you can bet the farmers would be out there with their tractors and their manure heaps all over the place and doing a hell of a lot more, making a lot more noise than the British farmer, let alone the Scottish farmer, who's sitting back, as you say, oh, well, we'll all make do, somehow we'll get by. Well, they can't expect much support, frankly, from the general public if they're not prepared to stand up and be counted a bit.
well, John, I think it's been discussed within the unions. I think prior to COVID, I think there was a strong feeling that we should be marching. I think there was a lot of farmers saying, well, actually, I want to be out there. I want to demonstrate. I want to show how important we are. And then with all that happening and jobs being lost, you know, it's a tough one to come forward and just, I mean, to question. I mean, it's happened before, John, where food has come into the docks and the Scottish farmer has thrown it back into the water. Now, I think if we did that tomorrow, there would be someone out there that gets food from a food bank, or there would be someone there that out of a job relying on that food. I think it would come back and bite us pretty quickly. So I think we have to be clever about how we get our message over. And I've been to demonstrations in Brussels, John, and I've seen how anti they can be. Sorry. Yeah, someone's trying to, that's a 121. Yeah, so I think the unions and all the unions here in UK, we're very conscious of the implications. You know, we're not being complacent about the impact. Mm-hmm. We because it's devolved with the Scottish government, we have a very good listening ear here. They haven't done anything though on policy going forward to counter the ag bill that's coming through the UK Parliament. And I think that's not helping us in Scotland. But going forward, I'd be very careful at this moment in time for a farmer or farmers to go out and demonstrate unless we were clearer as to what some of these trade deals are going to be, John.
Okay, Joanna, Joe?
I'm interested that you say that farmers were thinking of getting out in the street, because I quite often waking up at 4 in the morning and think, God, why am I not out on the street? Why are we not all out on the street? When you hear some of what may happen as a result of as a result of no deal. And I think to pick up threads of a few of those questions, I've lived in Belgium for the last 20 years. So I've witnessed lots and lots. I work in Schumann, so I'd witnessed lots of farmers' marches in Brussels, and they are very effective. But I think I was so shocked when I first came home about prices in supermarkets, even the posher supermarkets, and all of this 3 for 2 thing. It really made me wonder how farmers were able to pay the people who picked the fruit that was being sold for such low prices compared to Belgian supermarkets. And I do think that if we go down the potential trade deals with America, supermarkets, as we've just said, are extremely powerful. And no matter how fantastic the food labelling and the Scottish project and the encouraging people to buy local, at the end of the day, I hope it's not as high as 80% still that people don't ask. But there is still a large proportion of people who are very much driven by what they can afford. And supermarkets, as you said, have shareholders to please, so they will take what's cheapest as well. And so whatever can come in without the standards that the Scottish government may still set for farmers once we're out of the EU legislation, what comes in without those standards is bound to be cheaper, and it's bound to be what's on the supermarket shelves. So I think there's a reason for all of us to be out on the street, farmers included. I mean, you don't want to be undercut, and you don't want people to be eating food that's not of the sort of standard. So I really think there's something that the sort of Remain campaigners, the food protection campaigners, and the farmers should be doing together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I'm not 100% sure what it is, because at the moment we can't ask people to get out onto the streets together, even on their tractors, I don't think, really. And these letters that we're putting together that we're going to write, we're going to hopefully deliver to the Secretary of State for Scotland, so the Westminster government. But, you know, I'm not even sure that we can go en masse to do that, because we obviously have to be so careful to abide by all of the current regulations.
I think going forward, I hope that agriculture is still devolved. I do believe that we need that recognition to the people of Scotland that something as important as food production and the environment should be decided here, but under a framework that encompasses what I've been saying earlier, and why wouldn't there be? Regarding the cost of food, I have a huge issue in some of the practices elsewhere, and I've seen them, you know, and a European farmer, you know, quite rightly questions some of these, and their mantra is that we will just not let it in. It's a red line. In any trade negotiation, they will not undermine those standards, and there's strong reason, because the minute you open it or show a jink in the armour, you've sold your soul. That's how strong I feel about it. Now, would a politician, and that's where I then question you, is that I think the ideology going forward is to hell with that argument. This is what I want. This is what I'll get. And I hear it so often from certain prominent Westminster MPs that I'm really concerned that they're going to throw everything out the bathwater for the sake of ideology. Mm-hmm. And to an extent, that's what undermined Europe. It was the ideology of one size fits all, and also bring in other countries that didn't have those, even the standards of, you know, and I see so many Eastern European countries being brought into the fold of Europe, quite rightly, and then expect them to suddenly, over a short period, come up to the level of farmers in Germany or farmers in France. The expectation was too high. I'm seeing that happening in UK politics, where the expectation and their ideology is going to undermine so much that we've worked for the last 40 years. And you know, that does worry me. Now, to counter that is you've just got to do that strong argument and reasoning, and also deliver. We will carry on delivering healthy food. We will need a better brand, a stronger brand. We have some of the strongest brands in the world out there. Unfortunately, well, the irony is that from a Scottish farming perspective, I might not be able to compete in my home market because my living will come from people that value elsewhere what I do. Now, that's something I need to try and get my head around. And there's a few people that are saying, well, actually bring that on. And they will just forget about the local consumer because they just will not recognize the standards, the welfare, the premium that needs to be paid in order to have this food on your table. And what happens then? Now, that's been discussed. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul, we're going to have to close up in a minute.
I know, that's what I was just about to say. I'm going to have to run and leave you. But my personal take on what Larissa was saying is that the only way politicians listen is when you threaten to vote them out. The problem that the Tories have got is, sorry, we've got with the Tories, they've got another 4 years of an 80-strong majority. That's the biggest problem. However, in Scotland, that's not quite the case because we have elections next year. So probably in Scotland, we do have a bit of an opportunity to pressurise Conservative politicians. And even in Fife, we will have a Conservative list politician. And I think what we need is we need to have the Farmers Union and ourselves writing to these politicians and basically saying, we want you to support the farmers in our community, standards, etc. And I think that's the way forward. And that's why that poster behind Joe's is very important, because in an ideal world right now, we'd be out on the streets and we would be collecting signatures. We would be encouraging people to write letters, and we have been very effective in that in the past. Unfortunately, in the near future, I know that we're going to be talking about street stalls, etc. The maximum number that we could have would be 5 at a street stall, and we would have to be very careful about what we did. For example, handing out leaflets, getting people to sign petitions, etc. So it would really be a static display rather than a proper street stall that we would have. So if people want us to do that, please let me know. I'm going to go because I have to go now and up with the rest of the meeting. Okay, bye just now.
Okay, Paul, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, don't everyone else go, because we're going to say thank you to Allan Bowie, because I think you want
Yes.
to go talk.
Thank you, Alan.
The NFU have a meeting coming up, I think, in the afternoon. I couldn't work out how to join their link. They didn't send me a proper link. So, but I would mention the last one of the, about a year, 18 months ago, I go to the Northeast Fife NFU meetings quite a lot. And I was trying to say, shouldn't you be pushing food production instead of whatever else you were trying to push, you know, environment and all these other things? Oh, well, it's not politically acceptable or something or other. You know, food production seemed to be the second priority or a third priority, really, which it shouldn't be. It should be the top priority. I actually have old enough to have lived through rationing, and I can remember the rations we used to get, and my word, a slice of bacon was really a luxury, and a bit of butter. And we made our own butter, fortunately, but if you didn't, you were pushed. So I think it's not a joke, this situation. It's really quite a serious situation. Alan, I'd like to say thank you very much for joining in our little group. And we'd really like, and maybe you can get it around the NFU, that there's quite a large element in the population that really like to stand with the farmers if they were prepared to stand up themselves. If they want the support, the real support at a political level, and we've got elections coming up, and even if we didn't have elections coming up, we've still got MPs and MSPs sitting around who need a bit of pushing and shoving. Let us, let's get together and do something.
I would agree with you, John. I think we have to be proactive. I think we have a great message to sell. I think we have to listen to what others are saying and then go with that, And I'm, as I say, having led the union, you have a sort of thin line as to when do you breach, when do you actually become, and I've been in Brussels, when do you become physical, when do you actually get that angry, but moderate it and push it. And I think
you may be getting close. I think
I would yes, but I can't be alone.
That's not to happen.
Yeah, I will. But the thing is, I need a wee bit more clarity with some of these deals because they haven't been done yet. So we're thinking the worst, but I think we have to be. Yeah.
Sorry, Larissa, quick last word.
Yes, that's actually a question to all of you, because I am just, as some of you have mentioned already, I'm really concerned about the devolved powers, whether or not Scotland will be able to keep them, because I know that there's a lot of talk in Westminster that the devolved powers will be reduced. Yeah. So again, I think that is another area where we must not be complacent. And but my question to you is, what can we do there to ensure that Scotland will keep its devolved powers? I don't know. Is there anything we can do? Is there a way to campaign there?
I think Clive has just sent me a message. I don't know if you get to everybody else about democracy is actually at risk in some respects. Yeah. I mean, in Europe, in Japan, in America, they need any trade deal has to be ratified by their parliaments or their governments, or their elected assemblies. In this country now, an American trade deal can go through without any say-so from Parliament. No, there's an advisory committee. That's it. No more. Once all this stuff is through, there will be no more parliamentary. So that's getting back control, supposedly.
Yeah,
it's scary.
Yeah. Tearing up the Bill of Rights of 1689.
Yeah. So anyway, Bill, sorry, last word.
Yeah, it's just really to sort of come back. I'm sorry, Larissa, going after you, but really to echo what you're saying, and in terms of practical actions, obviously I appreciate your position, Alan, in terms of you're still collecting the evidence. But I honestly think that there's only one thing would be stronger than 1 million people marching through London, and that would be 1 million people led by a squadron of tractors. I think it's incredibly powerful. You must know that.
Yeah. I think the strongest thing, Bill, and we've delivered over the last 3 months, food. The strongest thing would be that week of no food. Now, I don't want that to be the position, but I have to pay people, I have to live, I have to be profitable in what I do. No different than any other business. But there is an argument that because you get subsidy or support, you don't need to be profitable. But I want to look after the soil, so I need to earn. And there seems to be a concept that food isn't earned. Food is a given regardless. And that's because you've had plenty. And the thing that really scares the politician, more so than not being elected in 4 years' time, is not having food on that retail shelf in 4 days' time. And we nearly were there at the start of COVID. I mean, really, the stops were pulled out. Interestingly, any export food, and we had the issue with seafood going from Scotland to mainland Europe. It wasn't being delivered because they felt, because it was perishable, it would be held up. So suddenly your whole supply chain, and this is why I'm asking for a food security minister. This is why I want the recognition higher up, because I think with that, and that accountability to a minister, you would then get that understanding as to, well, why have we a grievance about food standards? And the minister would be accountable for that whole thing, that reason to be, other than the DTI. Department of Trade and Industry will determine whether we have trade deals or not, not Parliament. And that's the crazy thing. So my just finishing up would be, well, why wouldn't you have a food security minister? DEFRA, we nearly lost DEFRA in the business bit. Of all seeing things going forward, why would you not consider that to be important enough to have that recognition at cabinet level and a minister for that? And that would help our cause. And then when I go out demonstrating, I then would have that backing, that recognition, that understanding that what I'm demonstrating for is understood. Because what's happening in Brussels and elsewhere, the French took it a step too far, and the French public now are questioning the French farmers' belligerence and argument. And I don't want to be seen as always putting my hand out for the next handout. That is not what I'm here to. I'm here to farm for good food, provenance, safe, you know, and that's, again, all these things put together, and then I'll march. But if I'm marching on my own with no one listening or no one there to support, well, why bother? And I can torch a tire. I've been there in Brussels and I've seen what they do. And I've been close to you know, I understood the anger. I understood the frustration. And again, going forward, I'd like to think that everyone on the screen here will be with me when we throw that food back in the water. But you need to explain to someone that's buying from a food bank, or not buying, or someone that doesn't have a meal on the table, as to why you're willing to throw that food back.
Hey, if it's chlorinated chicken, I think the whole country is behind you.
Anyway, I think the 1st of January, you're going to see a bit of a problem anyway developing.
Yeah.
Well, there is an argument that by throwing it in the water, it'll wash away the chlorine.
Okay. Well, very good. Alan, all I can say is thank you very much for joining us, and much appreciated. And just a message back to the farmers that they do have a strong support, I think, in the country. And we may be a very small little microcosm of it, but you know, I think not going for them. And just, you know, we want to have a strong agricultural sector and a strong fishing sector and all these other sectors too in Scotland. And I'm afraid there's a lot of risk you know, facing us out there. So we're with you. Great.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good night.
The rest of you keep around, because we're gonna give them a wee clap. Thank you, Alan. And we're going to stick around and talk a little bit about what we're going to do next for 10 minutes or so, 10 or 15 minutes. So
I'm going to have to leave.